It's a chilly autumn morning, October 15, 1972, at 7:30 a.m., and the factory in Bovingdon, Hertfordshire, is filled with the eerie sound of machinery whirring to life. Suddenly, a scream pierces the air as a colleague stumbles, clutching their throat in agony. The scene erupts into chaos as people rush to their aid, only to find their friend, John Dunsmore, slumped on the factory floor, foaming at the mouth. Panic sets in as others begin to fall ill, their faces contorted in agony. The once thriving factory descends into pandemonium. The scene is one of utter devastation, with production lines grinding to a halt as workers rush to their colleagues' aid. The air is thick with the acrid smell of chemicals and the stench of vomit. The floor is slick with oil and the faintly sweet aroma of perfume, masking the stench of death. Amidst the chaos, the faint hum of the factory's machinery continues to reverberate through the air. Factory workers scramble to save their colleagues, their faces etched with a mix of horror and desperation. At the center of this maelstrom is Graham Young, his eyes darting between his coworkers with an unsettling intensity. He stands, frozen, his hands clutching a small vial of liquid, a mixture of guilt and panic etched on his face. His eyes flicker between his colleagues, his pupils constricting in a mixture of fear and calculation. He seems oblivious to the mayhem around him, lost in his own twisted world. His expression, a mask of innocence, betrays a sinister intent. As the chaos unfolds, the factory's security guard storms into the scene, shouting for someone to call the police. He rushes towards Graham, his eyes fixed on the vials in his hand, a look of suspicion etched on his face. "Get him away from here," he yells, as he grabs Graham's arm, trying to pull him away from the scene. Graham struggles, his face contorted in a mixture of rage and panic. The guard's actions are met with a mixture of relief and terror from the factory workers, as they rush to safety. Before we go further, hit subscribe and the bell. We post new cases every single day. Let me take you back to the very beginning of this story. Born on September 7, 1947, Graham Frederick Young was an enigmatic figure, shrouded in mystery. This seemingly ordinary Englishman harbored a dark secret, one that would eventually propel him to infamy. Graham's fascination with poisons began at a tender age, and it was only a matter of time before his innocent curiosity turned into a deadly obsession. As we delve into Graham's twisted world, one thing becomes starkly clear: this was no ordinary individual. Graham Frederick Young, the central figure in this case, was born on September 7, 1947, at the age of 14, he was already making headlines for all the wrong reasons. He lived in a family home with his parents, Frederick and Bessie Young, and his siblings. Young's life was about to take a dramatic turn, one that would leave a trail of death and destruction in its wake. As we delve into his early life, it's essential to understand the circumstances that shaped this young man into the serial killer he became. Graham's youth was marked by a fascination with poisons, a fascination that would prove to be his downfall. Young's daily life was not unlike that of any other teenager. He attended school, spent time with his family and friends, and navigated the challenges of adolescence. However, his fascination with poison set him apart from his peers, and his obsession with the subject would eventually become impossible to ignore. Graham was a quiet and reserved young man, preferring to keep to himself, which often made it difficult for those around him to notice any changes in his behavior. His family and friends thought of him as a bit of an oddball, but they never suspected the true extent of his dark obsession. Despite his sinister intentions, Graham was a likable and relatable figure, at least at first glance. His quiet nature and introspective personality often made him seem like the last person you'd suspect of being a serial killer. He was a master manipulator, able to hide his true nature behind a mask of innocence, making it almost impossible for those around him to see the truth. Graham's charisma and charm allowed him to gain the trust of those closest to him, which ultimately made him all the more devastating in his crimes. His ability to blend in and appear harmless was a hallmark of his genius as a serial killer. Young's relationships with those closest to him were crucial in allowing his crimes to go undetected for so long. He was able to form close bonds with his family and friends, which made it easier for him to manipulate them and carry out his sinister plans. Graham's father, Frederick, was particularly close to his son, which made it difficult for him to see the warning signs of his son's behavior. Graham's mother, Bessie, was also deeply invested in her son's life, which made it harder for her to notice the subtle changes in his behavior. As we explore Graham's relationships, we begin to see the cracks in the facade of his seemingly innocent life, and the question that lingers in our minds is, how did he get away with it for so long? It's a chilly February morning in 1961, the sky is gray and the streets are empty as we take a look back at the beginning of a sinister tale. The small suburban town of Neasden, Middlesex, is home to 14-year-old Graham Young, a boy with a fascination for poisons and their effects. Young's stepmother, Molly, has just remarried his father, bringing the family back together after years apart. The air is tense as the family adjusts to its new dynamics, but little do they know what's about to unfold. The clock ticks on, unaware of the horrors that are about to be unleashed. Graham Young had been secretly buying poisons from a local chemist, using a fake name to avoid suspicion. He had been reading extensively on advanced toxicology and his knowledge of chemistry was becoming increasingly impressive. Young's fascination with poisons had grown to an all-time high, and he was now putting his knowledge into action. He laced his stepmother's tea with antimony, a highly toxic substance, on multiple occasions, and waited for the effects to take hold. But what motivated Young to take such drastic and deadly measures? His actions were a calculated and sinister move that would have devastating consequences. It starts with Molly's symptoms, vomiting, diarrhea, and excruciating stomach pain, which she initially dismisses as a bug. But Young knows exactly what's happening and is patiently waiting for the full effects of the antimony to manifest. As the day wears on, Molly's condition worsens, and she becomes increasingly ill. The rest of the family is oblivious to what's happening, but Graham's smile suggests that he knows more than he's letting on. His stepmother's suffering is now a game to him, a twisted and sinister game that he's fully invested in. But the most shocking detail of this crime is the fact that Graham Young was just 14 years old when he committed it. Yes, you heard that right, a 14-year-old boy who had the mental capacity and the knowledge to kill two of his family members in cold blood. It's a chilling thought that sends shivers down our spines. His actions were a calculated and sinister move that would have devastating consequences for those around him. And now, we're left wondering just how he was able to carry out such heinous crimes without anyone suspecting a thing. The police first responded to a series of unexplained illnesses within the Young family and a close-knit community in Middlesex. Initially, they suspected food poisoning, but the fact that the victims all had different symptoms led them to consider other possibilities. It wasn't until multiple complaints were made to the authorities that a thorough investigation was launched. By then, several of the Young family members, including their stepmother, had suffered severe health issues due to poisoning. Young's stepmother was the only one who seemed to suspect foul play in her own poisoning. The key piece of evidence that changed everything came from a local chemist, who admitted that Young had obtained antimony, a highly toxic substance, from his store a few weeks before the poisonings began. It seemed that Young had convinced the chemist that he was older than he appeared through his impressive knowledge of poisons and chemistry. The chemist had even allowed Young to buy the substance after he signed the poisons register in the name M.E. Evans. This revelation sparked outrage in the community and prompted the police to take a closer look at Young's activities. The police were now under pressure to catch the person responsible for the poisonings. The main suspects at this stage included Young's father, who had recently remarried, and Young's uncle, who had been caring for Young after his mother passed away. The police considered the possibility that Young's father might have been poisoning his family members in an attempt to get rid of them and gain control over the inheritance. However, when questioned, Young's father protested his innocence and the police were unable to find any evidence linking him to the crime. On the other hand, Young's uncle seemed nervous and evasive during interrogation, but the police couldn't quite put their finger on what made him suspicious. As the investigation continued, both men remained under close scrutiny. The red herring, the lead that wasted months of investigation, was Young's alleged interest in black magic and Nazism. The police got caught up in the idea that Young's fascination with these subjects was a sign of a deeper, more sinister motive. However, when they dug deeper, they found that Young's interest in these topics was nothing more than a passing phase, and not directly related to the poisonings. Meanwhile, the Young family's stepmother continued to suffer from the effects of the poisonings, and the police were no closer to catching the perpetrator. As time passed, the community grew more frustrated and impatient with the lack of progress in the case. It was a revelation that shocked everyone involved. The case of Graham Young would soon take a dark and twisted turn that would change the lives of all involved. Graham's fascination with poison was only the beginning. His early experiments had been relatively small and contained, but as he grew older so did his methods. He began using more potent poisons, and his targets expanded to include his classmates. The poison that brought about his downfall, and would later lead to the deaths of 2 people, was a common household item, antimony. Graham had obtained it by signing the register in the name of his uncle's friend. Graham had initially used the antimony on his stepmother Molly, who suffered from severe vomiting, diarrhea, and stomach pain, which she initially dismissed as a stomach bug. But it wasn't long before Graham turned his attention to his classmates, and his methods became more sophisticated. Using various household items, Graham was able to disguise the smell and taste of the poison, making it almost impossible to detect. His teacher became suspicious, and contacted the police, but not before Graham had poisoned several of his classmates, and had also experimented on small animals. The police investigation was sparked, and Graham was eventually caught and taken into custody. After a lengthy trial, Graham was found guilty of 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, and several other charges related to the poisoning of his classmates. Graham was sentenced to prison, where he would spend the rest of his life. Young died of a heart attack on August 1, 1990, at Parkhurst Prison. Despite his conviction, there was still some debate over whether Graham was fully responsible for his actions, due to his age and mental state at the time of the crimes. Graham's case raised questions about the release of mentally ill offenders, and the handling of mentally impaired individuals in the justice system. In the years following Graham's conviction, there were significant changes to mental health services in the UK. The Butler Committee was established to investigate the issues raised by Graham's trial, and its report led to widespread reforms in mental health services. The Poisons Act of 1972 was also passed, restricting the purchase of deadly poisons, and making it more difficult for individuals like Graham to obtain them. Graham's stepmother Molly passed away in 1961, at the age of 40, although it was never proven that Graham was directly responsible for her death. Graham's sister Winifred went on to lead a quiet life, and never publicly spoke about her brother's crimes.